saw some of these arguments playing out in the late 1990s. We saw pharmaceutical companies trying to cling onto their patents to life-saving medicines. In a way, this looks a little bit like a repeat of what we saw then.
Yeah, indeed. As you say, that we saw this in the HIV and AIDS pandemic, and now it's repeating itself. And that's because of the current systems and mechanisms in place that allow for pharmaceuticals to continue to do business as usual, even in the face of a pandemic. And that is, carrying on with their monopolies and charging as much as they please, and inadvertently, creating a barrier in terms of access to these essential and life-saving medication. And that's what we're seeing with COVID-19 COVID-19 medical products.
If I remember my history of all of this correctly, and the way that the global economy works, it's really crucial that India is with us in this. They have a population of over 1 billion people. That's a huge market for their generic medicine manufacturers. They're able to use that as leverage in this debate, I'd like to think.
Yes, indeed. So as you mentioned, that South Africa and India collaborated and submitted a proposal to the World Trade Organization, essentially requesting, that we have a waiver over COVID-19 products. This would allow for countries and, generic manufacturers to be able to collaborate and to be able to locally manufacture products, COVID-19 products, to upscale the supply. As you know, that there's quite, there's been reports of like shortages, and also with the vaccines, there is no, we don't have like a capacity that would supply supply the needs globally. But this patent waiver would allow for some collaboration, especially in countries where we do have capacity to locally manufacture. That would enable local manufacturers to be able to manufacture and upscale to meet the local demands.
Who is opposing us as South Africa and India? Who is going to go public and say, no, we must be allowed to make money out of this?
I think it's not surprising that we have high-income countries like the US, UK, and various high-income countries actually opposing this proposal, and which is quite unfair because they have the resources. They have already secured about over 50% of the vaccines that have been sort of proven effective. So essentially, they are preventing your developing countries from accessing these vaccines. So high-income countries, and we also have pharmaceuticals who are opposing this proposal, essentially saying that there are already mechanisms in place that will allow for equitable allocation, and also your COVAX facility should be a system that we rely on in terms of accessing these vaccines. But as you know, the COVAX is also not, we're only going to get about 10% of the vaccines from the COVID facility. It won't be enough to supply our population. So I think, with these countries, high-income countries, as well as pharmaceuticals, they're putting their best interest at heart. They're putting, their profit-making first over saving people's lives.
There's all sorts of sort of inequality issues that come up here. And let me sort of give an example of what I'm trying to mean. It might be that someone who is seen as living in New Zealand with a comorbidity, so say someone, for example, living with diabetes in New Zealand, probably has a greater chance of getting access to a vaccine than someone who is living in Zimbabwe who is living with diabetes. And yet New Zealand has virtually no cases of this virus and is generally seen as well protected from it.
Exactly. And that's how unfair the global, system is. And I think it even hits home, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a few weeks back that Aspen, which is a local manufacturer, would be in a position to locally manufacture vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson candidate vaccine. But what was not mentioned is that actually Johnson & Johnson still holds their intellectual property to this vaccine, meaning they will decide how this vaccine is distributed, how it will be allocated to countries. And there's no clarity as to whether South Africans will be receive these vaccines immediately after they've just been manufactured. So it also puts there's a lot of questions around whether we will get a vaccine as soon as possible, considering that we actually have quite a high number of cases, and as you say, so many other comorbidities that need to be considered. But other high-income countries that are probably not as affected as we are will probably be best positioned to get these vaccines because they have the resources and financial resources to secure these vaccines in numbers. So I think one of the things that need to be considered is that the issue around patents is a critical issue. It puts a lot of us, even the country, as I mentioned, that despite us having the capacity to make these vaccines or to make certain COVID-19 products, we still won't be able to make them because your originator countries will hold on to this IP, therefore creating, enabling us from making and supplying and better responding also to the pandemic.
Candice, it strikes me, there's often, when it comes to pricing, and I'm no health economist, I'm simply not that clever, but it strikes me that when it comes to pricing a product, you can either sell a lot of a product for a very small markup in each one, or you can sell very few items of a product for a very large markup. Let me give you a simple example, if I can. So, for example, you can make R1 on each bottle of beer that you sell, and you make an absolute fortune, or you can decide that we're going to sell bottles of whiskey for 10,000 Rand, and the markup is going to be 5,000 Rand. In the end, you'll probably make more money selling R1 per bottle of beer profit than you will having a profit of 5,000 Rand on a bottle of whiskey because you sell so few of them. In this case, it would seem to me more logical for the companies themselves to just make the equivalent of R1 on each vaccine dose they sell. They'll make a fortune doing that.
Yeah, indeed. I think it does. It does question. You do question as to, the thinking around it. I think it's also the same even with TB, and also how pharmaceuticals decide to invest on which disease area to invest in. In most of the cases, diseases that actually affect your developing countries, like TB and various others, they don't really invest a lot in the R&D, in the making of these treatments, mainly because it doesn't serve your high income countries where they would charge this particular drug at a much more expensive cost. So I think it really questions as to who are these drugs being made for? Who are they willing to serve? And I think it's quite clear your low-income countries are the last people to be thought of, and it has always been like that, and it will still be like that, and we're still seeing that the economies and how things are happening will continue to serve your low-income countries last.
Candice Sahoma, thanks very much indeed. Access Campaign Advocacy Officer for the organisation Doctors Without Borders, also known, of course, as Medicine Sans Frontières.